Welcome to another episode of the One Life Podcast. We're diving deeper into the weekend sermon. Kicked off a brand new series called Hidden Beauty this week, and we are filming this right before the Super Bowl.
That's right.
So we'll give you our feedback on the Super Bowl next week or maybe the week after. But
hopefully our predictions weren't terribly wrong.
That's true.
Oh well.
But we're coming off the grand opening weekend at our East Mesa campus. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, just a proud pastor. So many volunteers it takes to make something like that happen. Our setup, tear down, and then just seeing like that church just alive. You know, services that are full, so many guests that are walking through our doors. I mean, it's a really, really special place. I love my in fact, our oldest daughter is there almost every week serving. Yeah. And it's for setup and tear down. I don't know if we could ask for a better environment than the Eastmark High School.
Yeah.
And I just, man, you know, it's like so many people are going to come to faith in Jesus at the Eastmark High School in that space. So that's what I'm mostly excited about.
Yeah.
It's such a, you know, every building is a tool to reach more and more people for Jesus. And that's a really, really special place. And you're right in the heart of Eastmark. Being in a high school, like it's a centralized place to gather. So it's, you know, just thank God for what an amazing experience. How about you? What's your takeaway?
Really excited. This is like the kickstart, right?
Yeah.
So for us, we've been figuring out things for the last several weeks and gearing up for the grand opening. Now it's like it's time to get to work, right? We now have the spot, we have our signage, we have everything's ready to go.
And you can't miss it. Like how many A-frames are out on the road and
There's
flags?
like 13. Yeah, it's a lot.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's Amanda. We're pulling in. Amanda's like, "Is this overkill?" I'm like, "Yes, on purpose."
Yeah.
No, it's really awesome. Way to go, the team, everybody, and I think we can officially share this. Like, no more setup on Saturday night.
Yep.
You guys it's a one like Sunday morning,
bright and early or dark and early.
And Eastmark is allowing us to even keep some of our stuff on, like
a little
bit
for now. Yep.
Right.
We're still working that. We spent a couple years trying to work that at GPA, and then we've been able to keep a few things there right now.
I think, who knows what God's going to do? So I don't want to like put us in a box, but until God provides us with a more permanent facility, I just don't think that we could ask for anything better.
Yeah.
So praise God.
Good deal.
Praise God. Yeah.
All right. So this week we're kicking off Ruth. Hidden Beauty. You opened up talking about some movies, and I know we kind of teased this last week, but specifically the Book of Ruth is kind of like a rom-com, right? So give us your top 3.
I don't know if I thought about this after.
Yeah.
It's a romance.
Yeah.
Comedy. It's more like tragic than anything
That's
else.
true.
I just don't. I think it's probably like it was in my mind probably the easiest way to intro the book.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a comedy as much as
fair.
it's just a romance.
Well, we're going with it anyway.
Exactly.
So what are your top 3 romantic comedies?
Yeah, so I think Hitch is up there for sure with Will Smith, and The Proposal with Sandra Bullock is fantastic. But I think one that just doesn't get enough is because it's Adam Sandler. But 50 First Dates is one of the best rom-coms, I think.
Yeah.
Drew Barrymore, Loses Her Memory. That's one of my top 3 for sure. How about you?
All right. You've Got Mail.
No.
I love You've Got Mail. See, I wasn't allowed to watch some of the edgier rom-coms.
Okay, that's fair.
Juliet's just now introducing me to those.
Okay.
You've Got Mail's really good. Sleepless in Seattle's really good.
That's a top
Basically
5.
the same, but a little different.
Very similar.
I also really like 2 Weeks Notice, and 27 Dresses is really good.
2 weeks, is that Sandra Bullock in 2 weeks?
With, what's his name? Colin something? Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lopez has a couple really good rom-coms. She did one, Maid of Honor.
Yeah.
But I think she did one with Matthew McConaughey, All Right, where he ends up with the wedding planner. That's a great one too.
Yeah.
You know, I like a good rom-com. Amanda can attest to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, what's your favorite genre of movies? I don't think we've ever asked you that.
Definitely sports. I do disagree. I don't think Talladega Nights is a sports movie that was on the screen this week.
I had to search it. Like what, I just went, it's like, hey, what's the top 5 all time? And it was on sports movie. But this is fascinating. Did you know what the number 1 grossing sports movie of all time is? It's The Blind Side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would think like Rocky But in the theater, now you go back in the theater, but it's The Blind Side.
It's because Nick Saban's featured in it.
Gotta be.
That's why.
I forgot that you would even had a cameo.
Cameo in there.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So for me, Remember the Titans is my favorite movie of all time. The Dark Knight is my second favorite movie. Okay. After that, 3 through a million are just depends.
So you could watch The Dark Knight if it's on TNT. You're locked in.
Hates it, but I can watch it all the time.
It is a good movie.
I love Christian Bale. He's awesome. He's also awesome in the Newsies as a kid.
Newsies is a great movie. That's one of the genres I didn't throw up there is musicals.
I've been thinking a lot about the Newsies. These pictures of Luka Doncic with his like sweater on with the Lakers. He looks like Christian Bale when he gets transferred to the
out of control.
Yeah, he's like he has to work for the government now, and he's like has money.
Yeah,
and I'm like, this is what happened. We traded Luka away, and he went to the wrong side. And they're like, Jack, it can't be Jack.
It's true.
Yeah.
All right.
That's how I feel.
Are you over the Luka Doncic trade yet?
Okay.
All. Sorry.
I cry every night watching YouTube shorts about how great Luka used to be.
Buddy, how he used to be?
Yeah. It's rough. All right. Book of Ruth.
Here we go. Back to why we're here.
All right. So you talked kind of setting up the book really, but then like the history of different things. And I think the part early on was a lot about like, hey, we don't necessarily need to sacrifice what we think is right. We need to pursue what God says is right. So right early on, right, they're Moab or whatever they felt like was right in their own eyes. We fight this a lot, especially when it comes to like relationships, right? If we're zeroing in on that with the story that's going to come.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that. You talked about being unequally yoked and some of that, but what do you tell the person that's like entering in a relationship or is in the relationship where they would say, yeah, I'm unequally yoked, but this is what I feel like I'm supposed to do?
I think that you just have to admit Moab is very, very tempting. And Moab always looks really, really good, which is why it's such a temptation, which is why you begin to justify all of these reasons for why you do what you do because of how good it looks. So you just have to, like, again, I think this is the dilemma. Just go back to the meaning of the names. God is my king, but they weren't living like it. And when pressure, difficulty, when the temptation comes, we just begin to justify everything. And so it goes back to that moment of like, do you trust God or not? Admittedly, and hear what is true, like if you take 2 Corinthians like literally, and I do not be unequally yoked, well, guess what? Like that limits your playing field. And you're right. It might be longer than you want it to be, but I would say it this way, man, it's better to be in Israel, to be in Judah, to be in Bethlehem, honoring and obeying God, than to be in Moab against his will. And what ultimately happens, I think the parallels are now, I broke this down. The parallels are there. Like ultimately Moab will lead to death. It always does. It could be the death of a relationship. It could be a physical death, but definitely it leads to spiritual death. I've never, and I've been a pastor, 19 years? I was a college pastor, young adult pastor, so this is a real thing. I've never met somebody that said, no, I know what God says, but I can overcome that. I can convert that person. I can missionary date them, whatever the case is. That never happens. I've never, maybe it has. The majority of the time it flips. And I've said this before. He will get you into bed, or she will, before you get them into church. That's just the way that's always worked. So God, again, that's not. And some people will push back and they'll say, "Man, that's just God's so restrictive. He's anti-fun." I'm like, absolutely not. This is God's protection over your life. He's saving you from the damage and the destruction, and ultimately, He's saving you from death.
Yeah. That's good. So where's the line? Where's the boundary, right? Let's talk like young adults or college or even like you're a single as a grown up, right? Like this point where we're not called to only be friends with Christians.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point.
So this tension of like, okay, well, am I crossing a line if I hang out with this guy or hang out with this girl? I know that they're not saved, but like, so where is that boundary, you would say? Like, well, what would you tell that person?
I'll just use I'll answer that question by kind of telling you, and this goes back to a couple weeks ago in a message I just said about Amanda. Like I knew my calling. And so seeing Amanda and being like, wow, I think she's fine. And I would like to like pursue this. I think she's She's what, in my mind, like very attractive. But I knew my calling. My calling was to be a pastor. So that was before I met Amanda. And so the first time I had a conversation, and I knew she was a Christian, but the first conversation I had with her is, God's call in my life is to be a pastor. And if you're not okay with that, we can be friends, but I'm not going to pursue a relationship with you. And then her response to me was, I always knew, I'd marry a pastor. So then, so that moment was like, all right, we are equally yoked, even as Christians. We're moving in the same direction. So unequally yoked is not just, this is my interpretation, not just unbeliever and believer. It is, are you moving in the same direction? Do you have the same like morals, passion, purpose? Are you all moving in the same direction? I think that's actually the clear interpretation of unequally yoked. So Christian needs to be careful of this too. Non-Christian, you just have to trust God. You can be friendly and not have romantic feelings. Here's the difference. If you find that person attractive and you're continually putting yourself in a position to be around them, like that, you're playing with fire. And you just have to like make the hard decision, stay in Bethlehem, be obedient, and just trust God with the rest. I was having this conversation with somebody on our staff this past week. Like if God's telling you to do something, you trust him, you obey, and then you leave the results to him. Like you're trying to like, I think this is my calling, but then try and like still manipulate it. Like that never works out well. Yeah. So do you trust God or not? And if you do, then you avoid, because that's never going to end well. And you wait for the results. I would say it this way. Part of it is, what's the one step that you need to make? That was the action step. Some of you need to break up with that person that's holding you back. So ultimately you can find God's best and will for your life. But you're never going to find that if you're playing with something you know you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's where I wanted to go next, is not only like, how do we find exactly what that action step is? Like what are some steps we can take, or a step we can take to get clarity on the vision of our calling, of what he's calling us to do? And then also along those lines, you said the sentence, to get to the right place, you have to leave the wrong one. Yeah. So clarity on that too, of like, well, how do I know if I'm in the wrong place right now?
That's a great question. Part of it, so God's will is very interesting. I think we've talked about this, but it's worth repeating. So many people are God's will, like waiting for God to audibly speak to them, writing in the sky. And I would just say that as a pastor, I can tell you 2 or 3 times where I just knew, this is a rhema. This is God's word. This is the direction he wants me to go. That's happened 2 or 3, maybe 4 times in my journey. That's very rare. Most of the time, God's will is in his word. It's just common sense. What has God already said? Well, he said, be generous. So be generous. You don't have to pray about that. He said to stay pure sexually before marriage. You don't have to pray about that. Yeah. Just he says, don't marry a non-believer. People are like, should I pray about this?
Yeah.
No. Like God's will for your life is just to be obedient.
Right.
So I would say most of the time, God speaks to you through just what he's already said, just common sense, biblical worldview. So I have the extremes. Most of the time, common sense. Rarely is the audible voice. Sometimes, and this is, I think, Ruth's story, it does happen through circumstances. Like she was just a Moabite woman. She didn't know any different. She's a product of her environment, growing up worshiping Kanash, sacrificing children to this false god, right? She didn't know better. It wasn't until the circumstances of her life where her husband dies, her brother-in-law dies, her father-in-law, then Naomi steps in. So I would say most of the time it's common sense. Rarely is it the audible voice, the rhema, and sometimes it is circumstantial. Yeah. In those moments, because that's where most of the people, in those moments, that's when you just trust God. And there is not that goes back to Paul's Macedonian call. If you read Paul's Macedonian call, the book of Acts, God, most times it's common sense for him to go there. There was a circumstance they had to change, and then the call came. Yeah. But play that out. Common sense, sometimes like a circumstance, and then the rhema.
Yeah.
So that's my encouragement to people of stop always waiting for, and just be obedient to the very thing that he's telling you to be obedient today. And it's amazing how the next door opens, the next door, the next door, the next door.
Yeah.
That's how I landed here in Phoenix 7.5 years ago. It wasn't just this clear, it was just, God, what's the next step? And it all aligned at the right time.
It reminds me, like, when we teach through the growth track, there's a moment when we're talking about like discovering your purpose, discovering your calling. And then the first step is like, okay, well, what are you passionate about?
Right.
What gifts do you have? Like, God has naturally created you in a way where you're good at certain stuff, right? Everybody's different in that. And then the third point in your calling is pain.
That's right.
Right. And I think a lot of times our gifts and passions, we're excited about those. And then we write down the third one, like, my pain.
Yeah.
Right. But that's part of it, right? Like the circumstances we've had in our life affect the future, and they play a part in that. Like, God doesn't just cause us or allow us to go through pain for pain's sake.
Yep.
Right? There's a purpose in our pain always.
Well, it's a story of Ruth. Like, the chick flick begins with tragedy, like death. The first 5 verses, there's 3 deaths. So you have these 3 women, no money, no home, like all widows, pain. It's in those moments, right? Like, God's megaphone to your life is those moments of pain. I was just having this conversation last week. It's when you're, and I said this in one of the at the movies, when you're laying on your back, when you're knocked down, you're finally looking in the right direction, and pain causes you to do that.
Yeah.
Pain causes you to get clarity around, like, I mean, if it's health, but it's finances. It's amazing when you're feeling the pinch, how clear things become, and how you can easily say no to certain things when you have to.
Yeah.
So there's moments of pain that God, and that's when God speaks. So I would always say God never wastes it. There's always purpose. And then the second thing is, let's go back to this conversation. Like, do I have to trust? Like, if me trusting God means it's going to delay what I want. And I would just say it this way: when God delays, He's always doing something deeper inside of you. When you're not getting the answer that you want in your time frame, God is still answering your prayer. It's just he's more concerned about building character in you, so you can actually step into the full calling that He has.
That's good.
Many of the times you're trying to get there, but you're not prepared for that. Like, I would say it this way, like our church, right? Immediately I'm like, God, like, we're going to start preaching and we're going to be a church of 1,000 people. Well, if that was the case 7 years ago, I wasn't prepared to lead a church of that size, right? God was doing so many different things inside of me to build to where we are today. And it's not done. Like, He's doing that now to get us to the next and the next and the next. He's doing that with our staff. So I would just take that to every relationship. Like, why do you think it takes 9 months for that baby to be born? Because you have to prepare.
Yeah.
You're not ready. You know, I would say it's the same thing. It's a labor, it's the process. And then you have pain to ultimately get to where you want to be.
Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah.
Love that. All right. Well,
Ruth, it's going to be fun. This is going to be a great series.
yeah, give us a little bit. What's to come over the next couple weeks?
So I would tell people, this is one of the big questions that people always ask. Hey, who are you studying? Who are you reading? We'll put these in the notes, but here are 3 great short commentaries.
Okay.
And we'll put all the titles in there that they can have. It's just, and this, I love this. Like, we didn't even plan this, but this is
It looks just like it.
our graphic that we're using. This is Timothy Mulder's, and that's a Bible study for individuals or small groups. There is, on Right Now Media, some of our life groups, there's great studies through the book of Ruth. I think Craig Rochelle's on there. I think there's a couple others that they could totally dive into that just takes this a little bit deeper. So, yeah, no, we're going to talk about Boaz and the romance that's coming, but it's Ruth's faithfulness, right? That ultimately, not to give away the whole story, but God uses a sinful woman from Moab to be in His lineage, like the Savior of the world.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Leaves Moab, goes to Bethlehem, and I love that. So I just would say, no matter who you are, what you've done, thinking that you've blown it, like, if God can use Ruth from Moab, He can use you for some really powerful things. So that's going to be the purpose. And then the romance and relationships and all the things that'll come out of this. So
Love it.
Gonna be
All right,
gonna be a fun
looking
series.
forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, remember, the church is not a building we sit in; it's a movement we get to be a part of to reach one more life for Jesus.